Hi everyone and welcome back. This is a video that was kind of spur of the moment. In the middle of a couple of workouts that I was doing myself, I thought, or I was looking at some of my own kind of vitals and things like that, heart rate and that kind of thing, and I was like, wow, I was really surprised just at how little different two back-to-back days with a little bit different heat levels really negatively or positively impacted my my workout, identical workouts that we'll get to about midway through this presentation, and it made me kind of go back through my notes and different presentations, looking at different environmental factors, specifically here heat. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you know that I'm coming to you from Tampa, Florida, and right here now on the last day of May, we're really getting to the point of the year where it's just kind of brutal in this point of the this part of the country. We probably won't see 60 degrees again until late September or early November as a low, much less a high. So it really made me kind of go back through it, and I wanted to kind of bring this to you guys here in this presentation here on heat response in workouts. Real question here is, how big a factor is it? In your actual workouts, I think you'll find that just in the the real-world situation that I came across a couple days ago, it really was not that big of a difference that made a huge factor on my workout. And I'll kind of go through why and different things along with the sciencey side of it, but I wanted to also bring that to you while it's fresh in my mind. So what are the negative heat responses in a workout, and how can we acclimate to heat safely? So those are the two parts that we'll kind of go over here. These are two of our runners from Wharton High School from a couple years ago, 2017, both graduated and in college at this point. On the left here is Sahil Deshane. He is currently at the University of Florida, and here Eric Juergensmeyer is at University of South Florida. This was at our North Point Invitational in September. September is really, really brutal in Florida because we've got not only the heat, but the humidity is there very, very high. I find actually this time of the year to kind of be the most potentially dangerous, though, because you're just coming off a transitionary period where you're not doing very much, probably sitting inside in a lot of air conditioning, and you're probably starting up your macrocycle, your general prep in cross country. I advocated a hypothetical scenario, a bunch of videos in the description down below, starting right around this time frame. So this is really important if you are just about to get started. Any part of the country, you're probably in a part where you're getting hotter. I know that most of my views are from the United States, so obviously that's in the northern hemisphere and we're going into the summer months, but obviously it's applicable to anybody if you're just in a situation where you're going through a heat spell or things like that. Even in Florida, we'll have times in December where we'll have a bunch of days in a row that are in the 80 degrees, so that's also important even if you just have a hot spell or something like that. So let's go ahead and get right to it, the presentation here on heat response. I am Kyle Ajakino. I'm the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 7 years. Some of my credentials are there on the screen, and I'm really going to focus on what I learned here at Level 3, USA Track and Field Level 3 Endurance Coaching School. Lean on a lot of the presentations and some of the research that was done there, and I will kind of tell you guys where I'm getting this from. This can obviously get into a medical discussion, and I am not a medical doctor at all. I am an English teacher myself, so when it does come to that, I will show you where I'm getting that information from, and obviously when it is from my own workout specifically, or the way that I've kind of handled this, I'll make that known in the presentation. Alright, so some research into heat response. So a lot of this information is going to come from Dr. Robert Chapman. He gave a fantastic presentation at our Level 2 USATF distance school a few years ago, 2018, 2019, I can't remember when it was, something like that, in December, down at IMG Academy in Bradenton, about 90 minutes south of where I am here in Tampa. And he went over, he was doing he's Associate Director of Sports Science and Medicine for USA Track and Field, and he's also Associate Professor of Kinesiology at Indiana University. And he does a lot of stuff. He was really looking at, specifically at that point in time with USA Track and Field, how can they worry about altitude, how can you get altitude, maybe artificially and things like that, but he was also looking at cold acclimation and heat acclimation, basically all the different environmental stresses that comes with performance. So basically, we gain heat from two sources, okay? Our metabolism, which is going to be increased during exercise, just the processes going on in your body, which is increased with exercise, and then environmental, so you got sun, contact with surfaces, things like that. So those are the only two ways that we can gain additional heat in everyday life, but also in, specifically we're dealing with workouts here. And the body has a couple of thermoregulatory mechanisms. Regulating blood flow is a really important thing, and we'll see why that can be negative if you're doing too much of this in your actual workout, if you're needing to do it, by sending more blood flow to the skin. Sweating is obviously probably the most well-known thermoregulatory response, which means we're going to be losing sweat and other key parts that make up sweat, which can negatively impact your workout. Shivering, not really anything that we're dealing with here because that's to warm your body up. And there's also hormonal responses to different levels of heat or cold. Actually, if you remember from your chemistry class, probably from your sophomore year in high school, there is no such thing as cold technically in chemistry, or in this case biochemistry. It's only a lack of heat. So really hormone response to different levels of heat within your body. We also have some behavioral things. So body has some thermoregulatory responses, but really behavior, what you're doing, is the most key thermoregulatory mechanism that we have. What you're actually doing is having a bigger impact than any of the four things that we just talked about here. So your overall activity level, if you decide to modify what you're doing based on a high heat level, changing environments, maybe you're going more into the shade or something like that, removing layers of clothing, it's going to be more your behavior that is more key to this, but there are certain things that your body can become better at to help offset an accumulation of heat in the body, as well as different things that you can do also as this is going on in your workouts. So why is heat even an issue? I mean, you might have some coaches that be like, oh, well, we can't change the heat, so it's got to become stronger to it and things like that. So why is heat an issue at all? So this is probably the biggest thing, and this is really what clued me in as I was doing the 2 workouts on back-to-back days, is the increase in heart rate at any activity. As core body temperature increases because of your metabolism and the environmental factors that are happening, your heart rate is going to go up at any workout intensity. So this is really key to workout results. I've talked about especially things like aerobic threshold, your easy workouts, recovery, and long runs. Some videos in the description down below. We talked about having a range that you want to be in order to be getting the physiological responses from those workouts. We said about 120 to 150 is what I say here in Florida because of this happening. Really, ideally, it's 120 to 140 is what you want for those. The next aerobic workout type you've got is lactic threshold, which is typically about 145 to about 180, and higher than that you're really dealing with anaerobic stresses. So if you're out there and you're trying to do an easy aerobic threshold day and you're running a pace, but all of a sudden your heart rate gets up to 160, even though the pace maybe isn't where you would normally be for lactic threshold, you're going to be accidentally training lactic threshold that day when you meant to do aerobic threshold. So that's really key in dealing with your workout, and that's any intensity. So it can really mess up your plan for the day because the heat is increasing your heart rate and taking you out of the target zone that you are looking for. Increased blood flow to the skin. I talked about how this is one of the responses. As your blood is going to the skin, it's cooling it, right? We talked about the idea that environmental, well, even if you're dealing with an 85-degree day, it's cooler than your core body temperature, which is typically around 98.6 degrees. So your body is sending more blood to the skin, and then it's going back into the body cooled off. But this is a problem because now the blood is out by your skin. Your skin is not doing anything to help contribute to your workout, right? So it reduces blood flow to the working muscles, making less energy available via the aerobic system. So we have 2 issues here. We're stressing the aerobic system already because of the increased heart rate. You may be moving out of a particular training zone, and now you've got the fact that you're producing less energy potentially aerobically as easily as it could have been, because instead of the blood going to the working muscles where we want it to be going, it's going to the skin, so to help as a cooling mechanism. So that's an issue with heat in your workouts. All right, so now we've got blood plasma volume decreases from sweating. Blood plasma is about 55% of your blood, which is primarily the liquid, so mostly water. The actual red blood cells and other solid bodies make up about 45%. So if you're sweating out a bunch of water, it's going to actually decrease the plasma volume that you have in your blood. So this is going to reduce basically the effectiveness of moving oxygen on your blood to the working muscles, and it's also reducing cardiovascular function, and it's going to then further increase your heart rate. So this is why as you go deeper into a workout, so maybe you start out a workout that's meant to be, I'll show you one, this kind of did happen in the workout I had. Maybe you're doing a 45-minute run or something like that, and at the beginning your heart rate's a little bit high, so you reduce the intensity or whatever, but then you sweat out a sizable percentage of water reduces the plasma, it's going to increase this demand on your cardiovascular system. So now your heart rate has to go even higher. So now you're maybe even out of a zone again, even more so, while still going slower than you normally would be. So these things are kind of stacking up on each other, right? So now we've got this problem of your aerobic system is being taxed more so than it normally would be, and it's less effective because the blood isn't where we want it to be. So now there's going to be an increased acidity for two reasons, okay? Increased acidity, the acid is being produced, which comes with a whole bunch of negative consequences. Having acid, your body does not like this at all. Coming at lower intensities that would usually be associated with easier pace workouts, okay? So we have the reduced blood flow. Okay, so we talked about this already. Hemoglobin, which is what carries the oxygen on your blood, is a base. Bases neutralize acid, so if this is in the working muscles that are producing acid normally, it's part of what offsets what's going on here. This is why, one of the reasons why at lactic threshold, even though it's a medium pace workout, I have a video in the description down below on it on tempo workout, same thing, lactic threshold. When the blood is where it needs to be, it can help offset it because the hemoglobin on your blood is a base. Well, under hot conditions, we have this problem because more of the blood is not at the working muscles, it's at the skin, so it's not, obviously its primary goal is to carry oxygen, but it's also not neutralizing some of the acid that's being produced, so now you're increasing your acidity levels at this lower intensity that normally would be offset. And because, as we talked about already earlier from these first three things, the aerobic system is being slightly compromised because of the increased heart rate, the less oxygen available, and the blood plasma decreasing. Now we're going to have to supply more energy with the anaerobic glycolytic system. This is the acid producing energy system where if it's working too much on overdrive, you accumulate acid and you eventually have to stop because of it. So the increased reliance on the anaerobic glycolytic system due to reduced cardiovascular function and effectiveness of the aerobic system. So we're going out, we're expecting to do an easy run, but we're having to tap way more into this energy system, which typically, I mean, all the energy systems are always working. We really have one energy system and three main parts to it. This energy system, we're not thinking of training on easy aerobic days, but it's going to be taxed much more so, which is going to allow the acidity to increase, which comes with a whole bunch of negative consequences. So again, these things are just stacking up on each other as you go deeper and deeper into this workout and you're being more and more exposed to heat. All right, and so the increased core body temperature, this is what happens. This takes a little bit longer to actually happen, also like the reducing of your the water content and hurting the blood plasma, but this is sort of the first four already kind of work with each other, and this one is sort of its own thing together that then leads into disrupting the other four. Increased core body temperature disrupts enzyme activity and effectiveness to produce energy and regulate many body functions. So certain enzymes work in a very narrow range of an environment, right? Increased acidity can help mess up or hurt enzyme function, but temperature is one of the biggest things also in the body. This is part of the reason why you need to warm up. It's to help get aerobic enzymes kind of going, working at maximum efficiency. Well, if you warm things up too much, it's going to disrupt these enzymes' activity and effectiveness. So again, we're further compromising the ability to produce energy the way that we want to. It's going to, again, rely more on other ways to supply the energy. So as you can see, these, while it just seems like a little bit of heat and maybe pushing through mentally and things like that, as you can see, there's some very key physiological issues that are happening here because of the accumulation of heat from the environment as well as from your metabolism. The metabolism part, we can't really change on a day in, day out. And, as you get more and more fit, obviously that's one thing, but heat being introduced from the environment, what we're really talking about here, that's a whole host of problems that can really come into play. So this is so much so that Dr. Chapman, who a lot of this we came from, said, in our presentation, the single biggest limiting factor to aerobic work under normal conditions is heat. So we're not dealing with a windstorm that's blowing 70 miles per hour at you. We're not dealing with, an injury or being sick or something like that. Under normal conditions, normal conditions that you would normally go through, heat is the single biggest limiting factor to aerobic work. That should be the really, we built to that with all the reasons why, but if that is the case, if that's the end result because of these first five things we talked about, then heat is a huge issue. In fact, in this, very respected doctor's opinion, who does this for a living, it's the single biggest limiting factor when it comes to aerobic work. Okay, so this information is from the U.S. Department of Health. Made this little infographic here just to kind of further build up the fact why this is an issue in terms of water loss. So a closer look at water loss. This is one of the big issues why heat is an issue. So we already knew that, the human body, is roughly 70% water as we look at it. But the area is really important. So that's just key for everybody to always stay hydrated. But areas that are really important to exercise have an even higher concentration of water. The brain, 75%. This is the central governor that decides if anything is going to happen. 75%. Blood, we already talked about why that's an issue when you start to lose water. 83% water. Okay, that's a big deal there too. Heart. Biggest thing in terms of aerobic exercise, 79%. Bones are not really that big of an issue. They're a structural thing, so they are very low in water. Muscles are the reason why you're able to do any exercise also, along with these other things, 75%. So liver and kidney function, probably not really thought of when we're thinking about exercise itself, but I put those in there also as some of the higher percentage ones. So I think that it's really kind of shows you that these are some of the things that are really critically important to aerobic work and work in general with muscles and brain. And the liver and kidneys are going to have to do with filtering things out, like if you're dealing with acid or things like that. There's different things that they also can contribute to actual exercise. So it really shows another reason why, if you're losing water and things like that, why this is so important, and heat is a big contributing factor to the amount of water. Obviously, you control a lot of that if you're training yourself, and you can be an advocate if you're training a group of people also. In fact, I did a whole video on hydration and how it's more than just water. It's in the description down below if you want to take a closer look, and this was one of the things we talked about in there, but really have to consider that as we are looking at this because of how key that actually is. So to wrap up this discussion on water loss, losing just 1% of your body weight in water can result or will result in about a 10% reduction in athletic performance, and that is from USA Track and Field's distance curriculum. So that's obviously a very small percentage of your body weight being lost in water, but that is a huge reduction in performance. So again, not only if you're not really working with heat and figuring out how to best use or get around heat in your actual workouts, as we talked about previously, it's also just going to reduce your athletic performance because of all those reasons we talked about it before. 10% from just 1%. So obviously if you lose more than that, it's going to be an even greater reduction in your performance. If your performance is slipping, either in your workouts, you're not going to be getting what you need out of it, but also if it's in a race, you're obviously not going to be at your best. So, all right, so here's the real world scenario that I talked about that really inspired me to want to make this video. So we're going to have two identical workouts, not just, they're both going to be 5-mile runs on back-to-back days. They were the exact same route, and I'll show you the actual route itself so you can see that I'm not just making this up. But with different heat levels, and there's going to be very, very different results based on the different heat levels, and I think you'll be surprised at just how little a difference it was in heat when the actual workout started. So here's run A and run B. All right, here is going to be the first workout, and here are the two different things that are the two different workouts. So here's the actual route itself. Again, a 5-mile run in 39 minutes and 24 seconds. So that is 7:52. There's the route right there at 8:49 in the morning. And then you can see that the heart rate is 151. This was designed to be a recovery run, an easy-paced aerobic threshold workout. And as we talked about previously, you really want this to be, ideally it's 120 to 140, but in Florida, they're never really going to be under 140 and in the summertime like we are right now, or nearly summertime. So basically, I got taken out of the range that I wanted this day because, well, let's see, it was 79 degrees when the workout actually started, so probably in the low to mid 80s when I got finished with it. All those things that we talked about before. My heart rate was too high because of the actual heat level, it seems like. I probably wasn't acclimated quite yet to that point. I lost water as I was going through. It was changing the blood plasma level. I needed to contribute more energy with with my anaerobic system. I'll say as I was doing these previously in the last couple weeks, I was typically more in the low 740s, 730s, 730 range, something like that. That was really what I was shooting for, and I just had to visibly slow down. Like I just could not get my heart rate down. It just kept coming up and coming up, and I felt like I was walking essentially at this point, but my heart rate was still way, way, way high. So here is going to be workout 2, or workout B. Oh yeah, 752, and again the heart rate 151. Here is the very next day, and I'll circle the pace and I will circle the heart rate, and you can already see for yourself what's going on here. Very next day, so we've got May 29th, this was May 28th. I started 10 minutes earlier, not that much of a difference, but basically the same time frame. Ate the same thing for breakfast that day, and got relatively similar amount of sleep the very night before. So the only thing that was really different here, because you can see, again, 5-mile run, as you can see from the route, it was essentially the same route that we are dealing with here, but total time of just under 38 minutes. This one was only almost 39:40. This workout 7:52 average. This workout 7:36 average. So we're dealing with what is that? 16 seconds faster per mile. Okay, but I was 4 beats per minute on the average, easier intensity than the day before. What was the difference? 73 degrees when we started, 79 degrees. That is obviously not that big of a difference, but look at the difference it made in my workout. Again, this is purely anecdotal. It's just one scenario, but I think it really kind of shows how big a little bit of heat is. This is not exactly ideal, but it's closer to that ideal that you want from it. And I'll say just, I didn't measure the dew point or anything like that. It did feel more humid on this day versus this one. We had some late day rainstorms the day before on this one, so it felt a little bit more cooled from that reason. But I mean, just look at that. That is a completely different workout. I was going significantly faster. We said 16 seconds per mile. And I was in the correct training zone now at this point. Where here, I was going significantly slower, and I was out of the training zone. So, again, it just really kind of shows you almost everything being equal. Exact same route, almost the exact same time, and this was the second day, so if there was any kind of fatigue or anything like that, the day before run A, I didn't run. I'm kind of still just coming out of a transitionary period, so I'm kind of running whenever I wanted to. I woke up morning for run B, and I saw that it was kind of nice outside, and I wanted to go out and do it. So actually the day before was a rest day, so probably should have been more fresh on run A than run B, because I had just done this the day before. The only thing that's really different here is the heat level. I mean, again, the dew point was probably different too. I didn't have a way of measuring that from day to day, but I think that really can kind of show you how much just a little bit of difference. We're talking 6 degrees. That is not that much, but man, it meant everything seemingly in this workout. I got what I was looking for on run B. I did not get what I was looking for in run A. Not only the pace was way, way too slow, like I said, I felt like I was walking, but my body was working way too hard to be going at that intensity. My body was working at the correct intensity to be going this kind of pace. So that was, I think something really, really important. I probably need to get back to the point of getting up and running a little bit earlier, and that's really one of the things that you can control with this. But there's other things that you can control too, in terms of acclimating to the heat that we're going to talk about right now. Acclimating to heat. All right, so if you are exposed to hot conditions safely, humans adapt reasonably well to this environmental stress. In fact, a lot of what makes humans kind of unique, especially sweating, we're one of the few animals that, or beings, however you want to look at it, one of the few creatures on this earth that sweats as much as we do, and it's designed because it's one of the key adaptations to heat acclimatization. So if we're exposed to hot conditions safely and smartly, humans adapt reasonably well to this environmental stress. It takes about 10 to 14 days to acclimate to a certain level of heat. Okay, so a certain level of heat is kind of important. 80% of the adaptation happens within that first week, 5 to 6 days. Okay, so that kind of shows you that if it's a big hot spell, so like right now is kind of right in the wheelhouse. We've really gotten into our heat and humidity half of the year here in Tampa, Florida in the last about week or so. So that's something that it's going to take me about 5 to 6 days to adapt about 80% to, and in about 2 weeks I'll be fully adapted to that condition. But again, that's the important thing. So a certain level of heat. So let's say you're getting used to going out and it's about maybe 80 to 85 degrees with a certain dew point level, and you're exposed to that for this period of time. You'll be adapted to that heat stress, maybe running in the morning. During the summertime when I'm allowed to work with my kids, which right now we're not going to be able to do that until the very earliest, June 15th, because of what's happening in the world. But typically in the summertime, we'd run in the morning. About 7:30 or so. It's usually when it's coolest out, but there's light out enough to where you can do anything. It's typically between, say, 78 degrees and about 83 degrees. It's, there are days it doesn't get below 80s here in Tampa at this point of year. With a certain dew point level, if you get exposed to that for a certain period of time, you can be acclimated to that. Then when we get to the point where school's back in session and we're having to train some of these days after school, well, it's obviously a lot hotter. The dew point's a little bit less at that point, but now you're dealing with, say, 90 degrees, and it's going to take time to get used to that level of heat. So keep that in mind. Just because you're acclimating to a certain level of heat doesn't mean you're acclimated to all levels of heat, if that sort of makes sense. So you're being adapted to whatever you're being exposed to for this acclimatization period. The acclimatization requires exercise in hot climate, okay? So a lot of people say, oh, I'm just going to turn up the thermostat in my house and I'll be able to make it work. And this has actually been studied, and it just unfortunately doesn't work. Just sitting or living in hot conditions. They actually did this study when trying to deal with high-level USATF track and field athletes, and it didn't get anywhere just to sit in hot conditions and then to go and exercise in cool conditions like an air-conditioned gym or something. Just sitting or living in hot conditions does not allow for the adaptations needed for exercise and heat. What was found from looking at this was that you ideally need to be exposed to the conditions, whatever you're acclimating to, again, that certain level of heat, for about 2 to 3 hours, with a chunk of that time exercising. So what they found is, let's say that you're out and you're doing a 90-minute workout outside, or maybe 2 hours, something like that. Say 90 minutes, that's probably right in the middle here. So you're doing a workout, you're outside for 90 minutes, and then, you're kind of hanging around outside afterwards for about another 30 minutes, waiting for, if you're the coach, the kids to get picked up, or the kids are waiting for the rides or whatever, and it gets about 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. That time afterwards actually can extend the acclimatization period, but you have to kind of get into that sort of charged up, for lack of a better term. You have to have been exercising first for that benefit to kind of carry over. In fact, they actually did it where the athletes were being exposed to exercise in hot conditions, and then they went right into a sauna, and they found that extending out that heat period actually did allow you to acclimate a little bit more. So wrapping up this conversation on acclimating to heat, men and women, or boys and girls, acclimate at the same rate, so the same thing that we were talking about before, the same time frame, but they do it a little bit differently, a little bit stereotypical, but actually it is correct physiologically. Men tend to have an increased sweat response when they're acclimated, while women tend to have an increased circulatory response, or what we talked about, where more blood is going to the skin so that they're dissipating heat that way. There's that old saying about how women don't sweat, they glow, and kind of, for lack of a better term, I guess you could say that is kind of true here. Obviously, men have the same response and women also sweat too, but there's more of a discrepancy in how it's actually done, so that's kind of an interesting difference in the way the two genders actually acclimate, or two men and women actually acclimate themselves to heat. Okay, so some of the information here is going to be from WebMD, and it's the last bit where we're going to be getting really medical here. So again, I'm going to say here, I am not a doctor in any way, shape, or form. I am an English teacher, actually. I'm in high school, so just want to put that out there right now. WebMD is where some of this is coming from. And it's also something that we discussed a lot in that level 3 training that I mentioned earlier. But I also wanted to go back into it and really look at the most current data on this, and I'll point that out when we get to it. So, adjustments that need to be made while acclimating. This still comes from Dr. Chapman's research. So there is a need to alter training plan during this acclimating period. Okay, reduce your training volume and your intensity during this period. And this adjustment needs to be based on the specific climate and individual athlete being trained. So some people are more negatively affected by heat, or they don't acclimate as quickly or as effectively as others, so that has to be accounted for, as well as the actual climate that you're dealing with. So the idea being here, I had to change my intensity because I was not really used to that 79-degree temperature when we saw their workout A. And maybe if I had changed the volume, if I had gone maybe 4 miles instead of 5, maybe I would have been able to keep that average beat per minute below 150 and been in the training zone I was wanting to. So that's something you need to consider is how can I, don't just try and blow right through this, okay? You need to make some alterations in your training plan in the acclimating period. Otherwise, you're going to have some of the problems that we're going to deal with or talk about a little bit later. So there is going to be an increased need for fluids before, during, and after when you have this this acclimating period. Water is the first step, obviously. That's not surprising. You want to be drinking water before, during, and after, especially in hot conditions. And then electrolyte sports drinks are going to help replace what is lost in your sweat. That is best done after. The reason being, you don't want to be just drinking a bunch of sports drinks right before your workout because there are calories involved. Your body's going to have to be digesting those calories while you're trying to be doing your workout. So you really don't want to be giving that extra work when you're trying to be working out. But right afterwards is good. I mean, really, the only reason you would need to have an electrolyte sports drink when you're doing this, if you're being exposed to these hot conditions for, like, say, longer than 2 hours, maybe if you're working on, like outside, maybe working on your lawn or something like that, you might need to do it if you're out there for a really long period. But for the most part, and you are doing this with your what you're doing outside in your workouts, you're probably not going to get to this point, but definitely afterwards you're going to want to do that. So failing to adjust during the acclimating period can result in these very serious heat illnesses. Okay, this is what's coming from WebMD specifically as I went back through this. These kind of go from least concern to most concerning, but they're all pretty concerning conditions that happen if you fail to acclimate correctly. It can result in these various levels of heat illness. So heat cramps can be minor or severe in the working muscles. Basically, it's from either a lack of water or a lack of electrolytes. And this can happen during your workout. You can see that happen on really hot days especially, or it can happen a few hours after the exercise happened in these hot conditions. So you might have had this happen. I've had this happen where maybe you're sleeping or something, hours after your workout, or even just, later on in the day and you have a really bad, say, calf cramp or something like that. That is probably because your electrolytes are messed up, probably from it being a really, really hot day. I tend to have this happen right around this time frame now when you're not used to it and you're still trying to get acclimated. You could have this happen. So heat cramps are sort of that first sign that something is off. Maybe you are not actually acclimated to the heat and you need to kind of adjust your training volume and intensity so that you're actually acclimating correctly. Or maybe your water level and your electrolyte levels are messed up and you have to be also adjusting in this case. So this is the first sign that something is wrong, okay? Heat exhaustion is that next stage, and this is where things do start to get pretty serious. It's caused by either a loss of water or electrolytes, so same thing up here in heat cramps, but it's more so, causing confusion, dizziness, fainting, headache, rapid heart rate, profuse sweating, and fatigue. So fatigue is sort of the kind of the hallmark, the idea of heat exhaustion, but all these things are dealing with, like, reduction in electrolytes and water in your brain, in your heart, and these really important parts of your body. And it's sort of just a really, really bad situation. It's really getting to the point where you have to make changes here because this is something that can linger for a little bit, and it can also make it more likely that you have heat exhaustion in the future if you get to this point. And hopefully this never happens to anybody listening to this or anybody that you know. This is a very, very serious medical condition, heat stroke. You need to seek professional medical attention immediately if you get to heat stroke. This is potentially life-threatening. Extremely serious condition from heat exposure. Your core body temperature, if you're in heat stroke, is between 104 and 106 degrees. If you had a fever from being sick, 104 to 106 degrees, you would go to an emergency room or take drastic steps. This is not from any type of pathogen that your body is fighting off. This is because your metabolism and the external temperature has increased your core body temperature to a very unsafe range. This is very, very dangerous. Symptoms are pretty similar to heat exhaustion, but much more severe, right? Severe fatigue, confusion. The interesting thing is, at the beginning of it, you can still be sweating, but by the end, actually, the skin can actually be dry, and you can almost stop sweating because the body is almost out of available water to sweat out without completely shutting down. So that is the one kind of hallmark sign that, obviously, that the core body temperature is one, but Going from heat exhaustion to heat stroke, your body is basically, I've got no more available water. I can't cool off with this anymore, or it's going to shut down other critical life support parts of your body. So that's one of the big differences here is, you know, they feel very hot to the touch, but their skin has almost become dry because they're not sweating anymore. So that is one of the hallmark signs of heat stroke. This requires professional medical attention ASAP. If you can get them rapidly cold because you have like a cold submersion tub or something like that, that is probably the first thing that you want to do, as well as getting them cool, getting the layers off so they can shed heat that way. In fact, here in the state of Florida, there's legislation that's coming down that says all high school athletic practices have to have a cold immersion tub on site in case something like this happened to happen, so you can rapidly cool the person before medical professionals can be sought out. This is very, very serious. This is potentially life-threatening. If you start to have heat cramps or hopefully not heat exhaustion, it's a sign that you are getting dangerously close to having something much more serious happen. So you need to really alter your training plan to acclimate properly, and you need to really adjust your fluid intake to make sure that this does not happen. And one of the big issues, once the emergency is gone, especially from heat stroke and heat exhaustion, heat cramps, this really isn't necessarily the case, but heat exhaustion and heat stroke, having those levels of heat illness makes repeated cases of that potential, those heat illnesses, much more common, because you've basically jarred your whole body's inner mechanics, and you basically are much more likely to have something like that happen again. So it's very, very dangerous. Make sure you are treating the acclimating period in hydration with the seriousness that it requires. If I didn't mention this before, also, I did a whole video series on hydration properly. It's in the description down below. I would recommend looking at it if you're at all interested in that topic. Okay, so what happens when you're acclimated? So you go through the process, you adjust things a little bit, you've gone through the 14 days, the temperature is similar to what you've had all the way through. What happens to you physiologically? So this comes again from Dr. Robert Chapman's studies in this. Your heart work at any intensity is reduced. Well, this is great, as we talked about earlier on. If you're shooting for a specific workout intensity based on heart rate, workout at any intensity is going to be reduced after you're acclimated. It's less being stressed by that stressor of the heat. Increase blood plasma. So this is critically important. If you go into the workout with more plasma, as you lose water from sweating, it doesn't mess up your plasma levels because you had more going in. Your body, you know, you're going through it, and your body's thinking, well, this joker keeps going outside in the heat every single day, and I've got to do something to make sure that as we lose water, it doesn't mess up our aerobic system, our ability to supply oxygenated blood for aerobic work. So this is one of the things your body does. It increases the amount of plasma in your body. Sweating begins sooner during exercise, and actually it's increased too. You sweat more, and that seems weird. You would think, well, if I'm more acclimated, why would I need to? Well, this is one of the key adaptations, because it keeps your core temperature down for, you know, it staves off the increase in heat. It's a better way of putting it, because you're having this mechanic of shedding more heat from the sweating earlier in the workout. So a lot of times people will think that people that are sweating are not used to the heat. It's the exact opposite, more than likely. If you're sitting inside all day, your body's not used to that. It doesn't have the response as quickly. If you're used to it, your body's like, all right, it's the same thing. I know how to do this. Turn on the sweat mechanics, because we need to keep this core body temperature lower so that this can actually happen in an effective and safe way. It's going to reduce your body's need to send blood to the skin to release heat. Okay, so this is actually a negative, as we talked about before. If the blood's at your skin, it's not at the working muscles. So the increase in the plasma and the sweating rates that we talked about before is going to reduce your body's need to shed heat this way. It will still happen, but it's not going to need to send as much of the blood to the skin as necessary, so you can use it in the working muscles. Therefore, your heart rate isn't going to have to increase because your aerobic system is being compromised. So as you can see, these things are kind of stacking up on each other. Sweat is more diluted. This is really important, so you're losing less electrolytes. Your body realizes this person is doing a lot of sweating. Not only am I going to be sweating more, but I'm going to make sure that I'm losing less of these important minerals and electrolytes in the sweat by diluting the sweat from the get-go. So it's going to reduce the loss of those electrolytes, so that is important. So your body's metabolism isn't being messed up. You're not going to be cramping and things like that in your actual workout. So this is kind of interesting. The use of glycogen by the working muscles is reduced because they're not being stressed from this heat. Your heart rate isn't being artificially increased from the heat. Your body and your muscles aren't using more glycogen with anaerobic Energy production, we talked about how as the aerobic system is much more efficient at using glycogen to create energy. I've talked about this in a previous video on tempo running and alactic workouts in the description down below. Your body, when it uses something called the Krebs cycle for aerobic respiration, it uses one molecule of glycogen to produce, oh man, I'm going by memory here, I think it's 24 molecules of ATP, whereas when it's having to do it anaerobically, it uses one molecule of glucose to make two ATP, or one molecule of glycogen that's turned into glucose before you can use it. So as your body is able to use its aerobic system, because all the things we talked about before, the heart rate is not being increased, the blood plasma, and you're able to use your blood for what it's meant to do, to supply the working muscles. The glycogen use in the working muscles is reduced by about 50%. That is huge. You're much more efficient with your energy when you're acclimated to this, because your aerobic system is working the way that it is intended. Increases in your body temperature while exercising is reduced once you've been acclimated because of all the above adaptations. So your body starts to have all these things to help keep your core body temperature lower while exercising, so your core body temperature stay lower, so these other things continue to happen. You're losing less plasma from sweating, or sweating inefficiently. Your heart rate is staying at a lower level, so it becomes like a big circle, all these things kind of interplaying, and as they are being acclimated, as some of the things are happening, it's increasing the acclimatization of the other areas, so it becomes a big circle of how these things all work together to keep you more on point while training in a heat that you've been acclimated to. These adaptations last for 10 to 14 days from your last exposure. I shouldn't put leaving the condition. From your last exposure to that particular level of heat stress that you've been acclimated to. So maybe you have a cold spell that comes through, or you travel somewhere for a big race and you go earlier to try and get acclimated, and then you go back home to maybe a cooler climate. That can happen. Or even if someone's sick or they get injured and they're not able to work out, and we said maybe working out is the only way to exercise in the heat, the hot conditions, to acclimate. Maybe somebody isn't able to do it for another reason because of an illness or an injury. You can lose that the heat acclimatization after 10 to 14 days of that exposure. The rate and effectiveness, someone acclimates is individual, so keep that in mind. Some people are going to do it a little bit faster and more completely, while others may be more affected by heat, so keep that in mind as you are going through. Okay, last slide here, some key points just to refresh through this presentation. Heat is the single biggest limiting factor to aerobic work. That should be sort of the take-home point. This is not something just to grind your way through it and think that it's a mental weakness from not going through heat. Single biggest limiting factor in aerobic work. This is really something that you need to be considering, and not like I did the other day and just going out and willy-nilly doing your workouts and expecting to have a success just because you want to and you're not really thinking about the heat. Loss of water and increase in heart rate and body temperature leads to a host of negative training effects, and I needed to consider this as I showed you through that run A as we went through that real-world scenario earlier on. Even just a few degrees can alter the training effect, as we saw in those two workouts that I showed earlier. It was just 6 degrees, and it meant two very different workouts were happening. So the first one, increased heart rate, it took me, in that case, or you, into a different training zone. I was in lactic threshold training, but I was not running a lactic threshold intensity. I was running very, very slowly out of what I would normally do for aerobic threshold. So the heart rate can take you out of the training zone that you're looking for on that day and you not get what you want. But let's say you're trying to do something higher intensity. Maybe I wanted to do a tempo run that day and I lost too much water. It might have reduced the intensity out of the desired zone too. Okay, so losing the water, we said losing 1% of water can reduce your performance by about 10%. So you might be out of the training zone in the lower direction if you lose too much water because you're not acclimated. So either thing can happen here. You can be taken out into a higher zone than you want because of heart rate. You can be taken into a lower zone because of water loss because you are not acclimated. Acclimatization to heat can happen within 10 to 14 days, full acclimatization. Adjust your workouts to allow for this to happen safely and effectively. Do not just ignore this, because if you do too much too fast in hot conditions, it is very unsafe. It can result in heat illness, as we talked about, with heat stroke being potentially deadly. Do not put yourself or somebody who you're trying to train in this situation. Acclimate properly, acclimate safely. Do not let it get to this point. So it's not just the fact that, let me back up. So it's not just the factor of your workouts being messed up. Make sure that you're keep safety in mind here. Obviously, we're training because we want to get better, and if we're not acclimated, we're not going to be getting what we need in terms of training, but you certainly don't want to be putting somebody in a dangerous situation because you want to just blow right through an acclimation period. Proper acclimatization creates positive heat adaptations. How fast and fully someone acclimates is individual, as we talked about. Some people adapt faster than others. Some people adapt more fully than others to this different heat. These adaptations last for 10 to 14 days after leaving that hot condition, whatever that actual stress is that you've been acclimated to. So covered a lot of ground here, and again, it was just sort of a spur of the moment as I looked at 2 different workouts on back-to-back days, and I wanted to jump into this. Definitely makes sense here in the general preparation as I've been doing these workouts on general preparation for cross-country, because this is when everybody is probably going from a low intensity, low amount of training, and probably being inside to where the temperatures are now going up, and you're trying to ramp up your workouts to get ready for a cross-country season. Definitely keep this in mind as you start up your general preparation phase whenever you end up doing that for you or your group. I am going to go back to looking at some things that you can do in general prep in the next few days, strength plan that you can kind of put into place, sequencing aerobic workouts and timetables for recovery, different aerobic paces, just kind of put it all in one pace. I've done different things on aerobic threshold, lactic threshold, VO2 max, tempo, lactic runs, hill runs, different things that you can do during this time of year. I'll kind of go through the aerobic workouts in that case and kind of just put them in one easy to look at video that's a little bit shorter than the ones that I've talked about before. And then I'll start looking at some specific prep workouts, creating your specific preparation phase, the workouts that are different and why they're different in that phase. So probably in about 2 weeks from now, I'll start looking at making videos on that. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing. It really does help the channel if you find this helpful. I put out 3 to 5 videos on different levels of training each week. And the more people that like a video or subscribe to a channel, the more likely it is to pop up in other people's searches or their feed as they're going through it. So I would really appreciate it if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you've not done so already. Also, I've really enjoyed the fact that we've had a lot of comments in the last few videos. Find that really entertaining for myself and also helpful. So if you have a question or a comment, please ask them in the questions down below. If you've seen, or the comments down below. As you've seen, if I've answered some of those, I'm not just wordy when I'm talking in a presentation. I'm also very wordy when I type something out, and I really do enjoy that. The more I do this, I think the better it makes me at putting this through if I go through and have the justifications for why things are the way that they are and why I do things, and might help you walk through why you might be doing something for your situation that's different. But as long as you have that why, I think that's the most important thing. So if you also found this helpful, please go ahead and share it around with other people that might find it helpful. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.